Okay, so I wanted to share my collection of Qing Dynasty jewelry with you today. We're going to discuss several categories, types of jewelry and the techniques used to make them and the metals that they used, and then some of the symbolism and culture of the people that wore them. The Qing Dynasty was the last imperial dynasty of China from 1644 to 1911. It was ruled by the Manchu people, and it followed the Ming Dynasty, which was ruled by the Han people. The Han remained a majority of the Qing Dynasty population, and much of the Han culture was retained. The Qing Dynasty also included many minority groups, the Mongols, the Miao, Hmong, Bai, and Jingpo, and others from Southwest China. Also the Tibetans. So you can see in this map, this red border is what China is now, and the green shows what China was in the Qing Dynasty. So it was actually bigger than China is now. Let's see, the Manchu tripled the size from the size it was during the Ming Dynasty. You may have seen the movie The Last Emperor. That was about this time. The emperor was Puyi. Some of the accomplishments of the Qing Dynasty included unifying multiple peoples, strengthening the military, adding infrastructure to control the Yellow River. They had a lot of floods and damage, and they built irrigation. It was an era of elaborate ornamentation. As you can see, these would be very wealthy people in these pictures and probably in the later Qing Dynasty. Collecting this jewelry has helped me to understand this era a little bit. In this picture here, if you look at the hem of the dress of these women, you can see longevity knots. And you can also see the same symbols up here on the fence, which is interesting. There's a swastika, a longevity knot, lozenges, and they all have meanings. The ladies on the right were obviously very wealthy. These are more imperial folk with their dress and jewelry. And then there was the dark side of the Qing Dynasty, which the opium addiction problem was huge. And they also had things they did with women. They made them bind their feet, and you can see in this picture over here how tiny these feet were, and that was extremely painful. They essentially broke their feet to do this. A lot of what I learned is from this book, which is practically a textbook for my collection. It's called The 4 Centuries of Silver by Margaret Duda. And I would encourage you, if you ever see this, to get it. It's a great book. The Qing Dynasty ended due to issues with westernization. In 1860 to 1890, there were opium wars. Basically, Britain was forcing China to allow them to trade opium, and the imperial government wanted that to stop because they had too many addicted people. That led to unfair trade treaties with Britain and Europe, including the Treaty of Nanking, that reestablished that trade and opened it up a bit more for Europe. There was a war with Japan, resulting in famine and a poor economy. The dynasty ended with the Republic Revolution in 2 phases. The first revolution in 1911 by Sun Yat-sen. Yue, you have to excuse me for my pronunciation, and everybody else as well. The leader was Chiang Kai-shek. And then in 1952, there was the second Cultural Revolution with Chairman Mao Zedong. And that led to the formation of the People's Republic of China. The jewelry changed characteristics at that time. During that first Republic era, they were still allowed to wear personal ornamentation. But at the Cultural Revolution time, they confiscated the jewelry, stored it in warehouses. Some people buried their treasures to avoid that fate. And in the 70s, the People's Republic of China made that available for sale in Western markets. This is an overview of some of the pieces that we'll be seeing. You'll get to see them closer up as we go. Some of the jewelry was utilitarian, like grooming kits and needle cases. Some of it showed status or rank, hairpins, rings, nail guards. And a lot of it was charms or amulets, including baby boys, hats and hat ornaments, qilins, and prayer boxes. The pieces are decorated with Buddhist and Taoist legends, symbols representing the values and hopes of the people at the time: marital happiness, fertility, prosperity, health, peace, wisdom, career success for their sons. They often used rebuses and puns in the symbolism. There are many words in Chinese that sound the same but have two different meanings, and they used that a lot in the symbology of this jewelry. The challenge for me is to figure out what it all means. The metal techniques used were repoussé, engraving, stamping, filigree. There's even a little bit of plating. The metals used were mostly silver, but all grades. Some of these are not highly silver. They may have used tin. They also used copper, brass, and pak tong, which is sort of like nickel silver. It includes nickel, zinc, and copper. And they, of course, the imperial crowd had gold. It depended on what people could afford. I think if you could afford more, they gave you more silver in the piece. This fob was the first piece I owned. I bought it in the 1970s, and I used to wear it. And unfortunately, I broke that bell off of the side on the left. I think it was around for 100 years with that bell on it, and then I wore it and broke it. It represents a basket, which is the attribute of Lan Kehi, the Taoist immortal and patron saint of florists. Legend is that he or she, it's kind of ambiguous, roams through the streets and reminds people that life is fleeting. The basket is very similar to our horn of plenty, represents abundance. It usually contains flowers or fruit, but it can contain a baby, meaning fertility, or bats, which mean happiness. A lot of the pieces I own are bits and pieces, parts of how they would originally have been presented. And this may have been a portion of another piece. This is jewelry that's been made wearable for the Western audience. It's not authentic in its configuration. It just takes the pieces and makes them into a necklace. So the first category here is grooming kits. They include a hook to attach to the clothing, a midsection design, and grooming tools. These kits are relatively simple. They just have an ear cleaner, tweezers, and a nail pick. Fancier kits had more tools, and some of them were just decorative. The tools hanging off looked like swords and things, but they didn't really have as much a function as they were just decorative. This may have been used for tobacco and opium smoking too. I've heard these called opium kits before. Sometimes that midsection here is a little opium box. They would have worn these as a fob over a waist sash or from an apron. This is another basket representing fruitful abundance. And this one probably had this tool replaced over the years. It doesn't match the others. And that, I think, is true of so many of the pieces that survived. They over the years get bits and pieces removed and replaced. I want to point out here, this is the musical stone that represents good fortune and prosperity. On this gold-plated piece, the swastika is a symbol of infinity and immortality. This odd-shaped thing, I believe, is a three-toed frog. The legend is the Taoist deity Lu Hai owned the three-toed frog. When it escaped down a well, he lured it out with a string of coins, and it came to represent the wishes for wealth and prosperity. It's very common today, if you go in a gift shop, you'll see a frog with coins in his mouth, and he's probably a three-toed frog. And so people still use this figure to represent wealth and prosperity. This hook over here is a cicada, which is longevity. Here's some hooks that would have attached these to clothing. Again, in this symbolism here, this is the three-toed frog again, I believe. And there's a coin here, which makes me think it even more. So that'd be a wish for prosperity. Different ways they would have slid the, like the grooming kit on here and then hooked that onto their sash or their clothing. And I like this little, I don't know, this little wiggly way that they made a tighter fit for that hook. Some of them I've seen in pictures have a much more elaborate wiggly line here. This is a fragrance carrier, which would have held a bit of colored cloth, you know, bright color to see through the holes. It would have been scented with oil. The jade leaf would protect from harm. And bells, these all are bells here. They would scare away evil spirits. This is a bottle gourd, and it represents longevity and healing. It also represents fertility due to its many seeds and pregnant shape. It is the attribute of Li Tiguai, the Taoist immortal and patron saint of the sick and of healers. He brings long life, good fortune, and healing. You can see the holes in the bottom would have allowed the scent to come through. And sometimes these fragrancers were in the middle of a grooming kit, which kind of makes sense. Here's a man wearing, that's how it would have been worn. That's from the Duda book. So more utilitarian jewelry here are needle cases. Apparently these were not popular until the late 1700s, and they may have been influenced by European styles. Needles were expensive and they had to take good care of them. Handmade embroidery and needlework were very popular and important in the culture. You can see how the case is open to reveal this inner tube, which held the needles. The needles got put in the top there. This vase-shaped case over here is enameled and it has a baby and a flower on it. I suspect it was a wish for fertility and was probably a wedding gift. Apparently the enameled pieces were more expensive pieces. There's a close-up of those. The case on the right shows a magpie, which is the bringer of good news and joy. It is a pun. The word for magpie, ji, is a pun for happiness. The magpie perched on the tip of a branch forms a rebus for happiness to your eyebrows. Embroidery and needlework were an important part of the culture and clothing. Women were not often taught to read and write, but were taught to sew and embroider. They thought that a woman's soul could be revealed through her needlework, and she would be judged as a suitable wife or not based on the beauty of her needlework. Here's some additional forms of needle cases, repoussé and fabricated in this case. This one with the green threads probably would have been worn around a sash. They would close it with the sash in here. And the fish would represent wealth and was probably popular in areas where the fishing industry was big. These are needle cases in the form of Hakka women. The Hakka is a subgroup of the Han people who were persecuted over several dynasties. They became peddlers and migrant workers. They were clannish and supported each other. Hakka men had to migrate to work, so the women were left in charge of the farm. They were very industrious and wove silk ribbons which they sold along with produce, livestock, and homemade remedies. It's considered the only feminist symbol of China. The women did not bind their chests or feet or have wet nurses. There were no Hakka prostitutes. Hakka women represent courage and perseverance. You can see that they have a fishing pole here and ribbons. A lot of times they are represented carrying a basket, which would have had produce to sell. They have little fringe decorations on the hats in many, and that's a characteristic of their dress in their culture. The addition of this fish was probably just an additional wish for abundance. The word for fish, yu, sounds the same as the word for wealth. Another category, symbolic locks. They came in many forms and sizes. The locks sealed intentions. They locked them in. Mostly repoussé, stamped, engraved, some enamel, some two-sided, some single-sided, some flat. Some are actually functioning locks. They were worn as necklaces on chokers, chains, ribbons, and fabric piping. Locks were given as gifts on numerous occasions: Lunar New Year, weddings, dowry, for good luck at civil service exams, at a 1-month ceremony or a 1-year celebration for a baby. The lock was ritually passed over the baby and then touched to the ground, locking them to the earth. There was a high rate of infant mortality at the time. There's a bunch of different forms. The dragons on the left represent male virility and imperial authority here. The lower left puffy lock has 2 dragonfish on it. Sorry about the picture. That would be wishing a young man good luck in his exams. Here's just multiple forms with enamel. The baby on the right on the lotus, I believe, means continuous birth of noble sons. When a child is carrying a lotus blossom, the lotus is also a pun for continuous. There's a close-up of that. I don't know what this calligraphy says. It's apparently quite stylized. I've talked to some of my Chinese friends and they haven't figured that one out. These other locks are rectangular boxes. The upper right says safety for everyone. This center necklace with the bells says down here, 100 house safe lock. It would have been given to a little boy. The bells would have kept away the evil spirits and also let the mom know where he was. There's a tradition of long life wealth locks. The entire community, like hundreds of families, would make a small donation to pay the jeweler. The more money they had collected, the better the metal and quality of the piece. The lock could be worn by a child or hung in or on the house to wish for safety and prosperity. Sometimes the surnames of the people who donated money were engraved on little leaf-shaped dangles from some of these pieces. None in my examples, though. Most pieces weren't signed, but this one you can see is, there are a few that I'll point out are signed. Here's a picture of the children wearing the locks, a choker and a chain, and very proud parents, hopeful parents. This is a close-up of the dragon lock. You can see the figure in the center, I believe, is Dongfang Shu, the Taoist deity representing longevity and cleverness. He carries a branch of immortality and a peach. The legend says that he stole the peach of immortality from the garden of the Queen Mother of the West and lived for 1,000 years. The reverse side, in my understanding, says long life and prosperity. This butterfly lock would be for a boy going to or returning from his civil service exams. The calligraphy banner on the left means All students excel at testing, and the figure shows a boy at school. The banner on the right says, "Hope you are the top candidate after testing." And the figures above it show a person leaning down to shake hands to congratulate the test taker. The plants growing in the middle of the piece symbolize growth and fruitfulness, and the figures are celestial deities. The figure on the left holding a child is Fu Jing. He represents prosperity. This is Lu Jing. You can tell by his official winged hat, and he carries a tablet. He is bestowing a blessing of status or rank. The bells on the bottom have symbols for longevity. I think you can see this one. The reverse side of the butterfly shows a figure in the center, which I think is a cricket, representing abundant wealth that would be supported by these coins. And the lotus seed pods for growth. The double lions are for courage and safety. Everyone wished their sons to become civil servants in the imperial government. It was the highest measure of success. You had to be well-versed in many areas, including music, poetry, and calligraphy, to pass the 3 civil service exams. The first was in your province, the next was in its capital, and then in Beijing. Apparently these tests were really hard and there was a lot of pressure around them. It's been said that this national test program of the civil service exams is the basis for the common cultural attitude regarding hard work and the importance of education, which continues to be emphasized today. Here's some locks that actually work. Not too many of them do. Most of them are symbolic. This one I can open, and this one I can't. I may have a key. I don't know. I've never been able to open that. This is an example of some enameled locks, bean-shaped locks, and flat-etched locks. So this one looks like bronze or copper, brass. I'm not sure what that is. So these would have been maybe more affordable for people over here. These 2 locks are really interesting. They were made in the Republic period, around 1911. The first part of the revolution ended the Qing Dynasty, still allowed people to wear and have jewelry, but the message on them changed dramatically. The bottom lock here says, "Young Hero," and it has symbolism for agricultural work and the star for communism. This red residue is sealing wax of the official seal that the government now requires for any antiquities to be exported. This piece also has a mark here, which is nice. This side of that same piece says "Peace for All." It has a picture of the Forbidden City in Beijing, which was the capital of the Qing Dynasty and is the capital of the People's Republic of China as well. The top lock on both sides, I believe, says "Wishes for long life," and it has the flags of the Republic. A metal navy pactong. This piece I like because it has all its original parts together. There's a boy on a qilin, probably going for his civil service exams here, holding a lotus. This is the creature we'll talk about later. I believe this one's handmade. It may not be old, and it may not be much silver, but I do like how it was made. You can see that this distance here is a little shorter than this distance over here. And you can kind of tell that these are hand stamped, the border. This is probably the best piece in my collection. I added the choker for display. It didn't come with it. The other 2 pieces came together, but I don't think they're original to each other based on the border and the quality of the people in the pictures. There's the back side for view. Here's a close-up of the midsection. This is possibly, I got this information from a Chinese friend. It's possibly a story about 3 daughters of a god who came down to earth and married fishermen. And she thinks that because this looks like a fish, she feels like there's a boat. I don't know, this looks like the Great Wall of China to me, so I'm not really sure. I think in that story, they also carried a fan and an umbrella. So figuring them out is always a challenge, especially this one. This is a mystery to me. All the things on the border seem to represent marriage, the bat for happiness, the seed pods and fruits and things for fertility. The hummingbird having a flower has a sexual connotation, but I have no idea what's going on in the middle here. So that one is yet to be figured out. But I love the quality of the workmanship on this piece. It's beautiful. Even if you get even closer to it, you can see even better that quality. And it's quite large. These 2 locks wish for long life, 100 years. On the left, there's a pun. The word for bat is fu. It sounds like the word for good fortune and blessings. The metal on the right looks like pak tong. This one I just thought was so beautiful. It's elaborate. It represents fertility and growth and probably purity, because I believe it's a lotus pod. It probably was a wedding gift or a dowry gift. And I believe it says 100 years long life. Dowry was incidentally paid to the bride's family. This one I just love because of the detail. Again, I'm not sure about the story, but the person in the middle is a young person because of the hairstyle. They have these kind of little knots on the side. So that's a young person. This is probably the deity Dongfeng Shu, representing longevity and cleverness. The person on the left, I am not sure if that represents a particular deity or person in history, but they appear to be bestowing a blessing on this young person who's kneeling. The floor and the buildings and the tree are rather specific, and I suspect they have something to do with the legend, and I just have yet to identify it. I also have the flip side of this. Sometimes you can actually see the picture better on the flip side, and I like the detail that you can see here. So this is sons. This is all about sons. When a woman married, she would take care of her mother-in-law until she produced a son. Only then was she respected and admired. If there was no child by the age of 40, the husband could remarry another wife. If the second wife had a child, it would be considered belonging to the first wife. And sons were so important. They meant financial security. So little boy figures were given to women when they were married or in their dowry. A charm to wish for sons. Sometimes they were worn inside the clothes. Only sons were allowed to get a good education and become successful civil servants to support the family. So they were very important. You can note a movable part here on many of them has been lost on others, just so that we know we're not talking about girls here. These little boys are stepping up, which represents speedy advancement in the world, getting ahead, upward mobility. This is an interesting representation of twins. I don't know if there's a story or a particular meaning to this. There might be a legend related to twins, but I love the detail on these. Here's some pictures from Margaret Duda's book of a woman wearing one of these baby charms, carrying a baby, and also another image of a little boy stepping up. So hairpins and hair ornaments. The flat silver one in this grouping has symbols for double happiness and longevity and was probably for a wedding. This large pin looks like brass and has kind of an uncommon filigree work at the top. It may have been the work of an ethnic minority. Far right, you can see this one is enameled. This particular one is stone with some enamel down here. They were often in sets, these picks, and meant to be worn together in some kind of configuration. These are double-ended hair ornaments. These two share almost identical design, and I did buy them together. They're decorated with plum blossoms for longevity and perseverance. There was a flower to represent each season. The plum blossom was for winter. You can see, again, sorry, these are not the best pictures. This one on the bottom was actually a really nice quality one in its day. It has enameling and it is also marked. Here's a close-up. You can see this one was decorated in almost the identical way, but the one in the rear is much nicer than the one in the front, the way it was done. It's interesting that they came together. And here's a close-up of the enameled one with a infinity knot and a prosperity symbol. Han women wore these hair ornaments, and this is how they wore them, in some sort of bun. I've never tried. There's another way that hair ornaments were worn. So this section's on hats and hat ornaments. This would be a young child's hat with the 8 Taoist immortals, which bless the child with their attributes. A little bell decoration on the side would have let us know where the kid was and also keep the evil spirits away. The needlework on the top is interesting, and I'm not sure that these figures are old, but the hat is definitely an authentic antique. And I believe that this piece and these little front pieces are probably original to the hat. I don't think these are. This is a lion's face with bells. That would have been also a decoration for a child's hat. On the right, this lion came with another lion, a mirror image lion, and they would have blessed the wearer of the hat with courage. I think that this one is probably a reproduction, but I like him anyway. This ornament with dangles, which I broke in half because it's long, and I wanted you to see up close. This was a really common style for a hat ornament. It and the circular ornament are decorated with the same characters. These are the he heavenly twins who bring harmony, blessings, and wealth to a marriage or business partnership. One always carries a lotus and the other carries a closed box of treasures. There's also fruit at the bottom for fruitfulness. These are various hat ornaments. Most of them showing Shaojing, the god of longevity. Also, I believe that this is Maitreya, Buddha's successor. He had a big tummy, long ears, a bare chest, a big smile. He's often called the laughing Buddha, and he represents peace and affluence. This black headpiece, unfortunately, is upside down. You'll see in the next picture how that was worn. Just some random little bits on there. I think it would have been worn like this. Now, they did this with hair, but they also did it with fabric pieces. This picture was kind of where it evolved. As time went on, the headpieces got bigger and bigger, especially for the richer people. But similar style, just getting bigger, more ornamented. Here's some more typical ornaments that would have been sewn on hats. saying long life. Here's Xiaojing again with his deer. That was very common. And this is my interpretation of this, but basically means long life. Qilin's another category, mythical creature with the head of a dragon, a body with scales shaped like a deer's body, the hooves of horses, the mane and tail of a lion, imagined somewhat differently by every jeweler because they didn't have photographs of those animals. They were supposed to be benevolent, wise creatures. They symbolize cosmic harmony and order. Supposedly, they appear when the empire is in balance and under the leadership of a benevolent ruler. It also evolved into being the beast that brings babies like our stork. The rider can be a young test candidate or a young child, or Guanyin, the goddess responsible for blessing folks with children. It's an amulet worn by mothers hoping to bear male children, young boys slated to be scholars, and young men on their way to tests, or possibly returning from a successful test. The rider is usually carrying a lotus flower, the symbol of purity amid corruption. That's a good message for a potential civil servant, I think. And sometimes they're carrying an instrument or a book in the other hand, like here. Here's a young man and his hopeful parents. He's wearing a qilin, sorry. This is a qilin on a repoussé lock. It has, you can see the upright, graceful stance of the qilin as it prances through the clouds, delivering this young man. It seems the image is more clear on the back once again. This piece also to me looks quite hand done. Some of the pieces I know were stamped on a steel template. I'm not sure what the term is for that, almost like a hydraulic press would use. I was shown one of them by an antique dealer in Seattle once. He had one that was used to make rings. New Year's celebration was a time when gifts were given to young men getting ready to travel or returning from the civil service exams, and that's when they might have received such a thing. This is a close-up detail of the small qilin. This was maybe a charm for women wishing for continuous sons. I believe this one is like a stork. That's this one over here. It's quite a close-up. It's actually much smaller than this one over on the right. There's marks again on the back of these pieces here, silver maker mark. Or who knows, it could be saying how much silver's in there. The figure on the right is a scholar going to take the tests. He's carrying an instrument, I think, which is a mouth organ called a sheng, and he's carrying the lotus. On this one, the rider's facing backwards, and I was wondering if that meant maybe that it was given to the student as a reward after the tests. He also carries a lotus over here. The style feels a lot more to me like the Southwest minorities, closer to Vietnam, Laos, Burma. It has a kind of a Thai feeling to me. Right, I think you can see the style's quite different than the others. Almost looks like elephant legs. I had to include this, even though I didn't include rings. But this is a depiction of the old men of the North and South Pole playing chess to determine the length of a man's life. They're named, pronunciation bad again, Bido. He records the death rates, and Nando records the birth rates. Next category is prayer boxes. I believe this is pronounced Gao. They were worn by mostly Mongolians and Tibetans for protection while traveling, and sometimes placed on an altar in the home. The one on the left is quite large and nice quality. The one on the right is lesser quality and smaller. They would contain relics, maybe a piece of the monk's robe, food, or ashes of a religious leader. There's the backs. The back was not made of the same material. This one almost looks like it was a scrap material, maybe tin. The back of the smaller box is brass and appears to have a Buddhist stamp on it. You know, I hate to say that when I received this beautiful one on the left, I didn't know about what might be inside. And I think I threw out what was in there. I think there might have been a piece of cloth in there, and I think I tossed it. There's the inside. And a close-up of this filigree work, which I think is really fine. And nice turquoise in this piece as well. Here's how some modern people wear the prayer boxes still. And last but not least, I had to throw in a few earrings. So you could see these tiny, tiny pieces that they used to make the dangles. These were popular with the Southeastern minority women. So anyway, that's it. I continue to work on deciphering and understanding the jewelry. It's so full of meaning. And I'm just really grateful that it's led me to understand a little bit of Chinese history.
Wow, fantastic. Can we get a round of applause? Oh my gosh, what an amazing presentation. Feel free to unmute. I have a ton of questions and I know that some of you do too. So I'll start off by asking one. Marianne, what are the sizes in, say, millimeters or centimeters of, like, for example, those locks? The very, like,
okay, well, I have a few here in case you ask that. All different sizes, really. This one's quite large. You can see next to my face.
Wow.
For scale. This is probably it's one of the biggest. The other one's that flat repoussé with the chulin on it. That's quite large as well.
So that's like 6 inches or so?
Yeah, about 6 inches.
And is that like a quarter of a pound or so? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense of what it would have been like to wear something like that.
It's pretty heavy. Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing.
So cool. So anyone else have questions? Feel free to pipe